AITA for giving crappy Christmas gifts to my boyfriend's family and ruining my marriage. I married my soon-to-be ex-husband in 2018, and from the very beginning, his family made it abundantly clear that they did not like me. They weren't even subtle about it, which made it all the more painful. My husband at the time, ever the optimist, insisted that they were just putting up a tough exterior and that, in time, they would come to love me. He reassured me over and over that if I just gave it some time and kept showing them that I was a good person, they would warm up to me. I wanted to believe him. I wanted to believe that people weren't just outright cruel for no reason. I wanted to believe that love and kindness would eventually be reciprocated. I did everything I could to endear myself to them. I was always polite, always respectful, and always tried to bring something when I visited. I never showed up empty-handed because I was raised to be a gracious guest. One time, early in our relationship, I joined them for dinner and spent hours baking a homemade cake to bring as a gift, thinking it would be a sweet gesture. When I stepped into the kitchen and handed it to his mother, thanking her for inviting me, she took the plate, looked me in the eye, and walked straight over to the trash can. Without a single word, she dumped the entire cake into the garbage, handed the empty plate back to me, and turned away as if I were completely invisible. I was stunned. I had never been treated like that in my life. When I told my husband what had happened, he immediately confronted her. That was when the crocodile tears started. Suddenly, she was sniffling and claiming it was all just a horrible accident. She said she had grabbed the plate, but I had let go too quickly, and it slipped out of her hands. She swore she hadn't meant to throw it away, but once it hit the floor, she had no choice. My sister-in-law, ever the devoted lapdog, chimed in to confirm her mother's version of events. My husband hesitated for a moment, looking between them and me, and then he sighed, rubbed his temples, and told me it was just a misunderstanding. I should let it go. That should have been the moment I realized that I was alone in this marriage. His family had no problem making assumptions about me either. My husband owned his own business, and they immediately decided I was a gold digger. They never said it to my face, but I knew what they were saying behind my back. They made it clear in the way they talked about other women, always with an edge of suspicion, as if any woman who married into their family had ulterior motives. They insisted my husband get a prenup before we got married, which I didn't care about because I genuinely loved him and had no intention of ever getting divorced. If signing that piece of paper made them hate me a little less, then so be it. His business was doing well when we got married, but then COVID hit, and it all crumbled. He tried to keep it afloat, pouring his savings into it, and I did the same. I drained my own accounts trying to help, but I drew the line at going into debt for it. Eventually, when there was nothing left, he had to shut it down. He spiraled into depression after that. He couldn't find new work and spent months feeling lost and hopeless. That was when he suggested we move to his hometown, closer to his family. He said it would give him a stronger support system and that being around them would help him feel less alone. Against my better judgment, I agreed. I told myself that maybe, just maybe, if I sacrificed my comfort for his, it would finally prove to his family that I was in this for the long haul. Moving back to his hometown was one of the biggest mistakes of my life. Since he was struggling, I took on the role of the main breadwinner. He wanted to work part-time while trying to restart his business, so I supported us. I paid the rent. I paid the bills. And because he was struggling emotionally, I picked up even more of the responsibilities in our relationship. One of those responsibilities was buying gifts. Like an absolute fool, I thought that if I bought thoughtful, expensive gifts for his family, they would finally see that I was a good person who genuinely cared about them. Every year, I poured time and effort into picking out gifts that suited them, things I knew they would love. And every year, when my husband and I received a couple's gift, it was always something clearly intended for just him. Holidays were spent with them. Every single one. There was never any compromise, never a discussion about spending time with my family instead. We had monthly dinners with the whole family, where I quickly realized that if I ever tried to join a conversation, the room would go silent. I became so accustomed to it that I eventually stopped trying to talk at all when I was around them. I just sat there, an outsider in my own marriage. Then came December of last year. The final straw. His family finalized plans for Christmas, Christmas Eve dinner and Christmas lunch, as usual. A few days later, my husband came home looking uncomfortable. That should have been my first clue. He hesitated before finally telling me that his family had decided they didn't want me to join them for Christmas Eve dinner or Christmas lunch. Apparently, I ruined the family vibe. I looked at him, waiting for him to tell me he had refused to go without me. Waiting for him to say that he had stood up for me. Instead, he just looked away and mumbled that he was still going. I was livid. I was heartbroken. And in that moment, I knew my marriage was over. I went into full self-preservation mode. I had already bought their gifts, but I returned every single one of them. Instead, I replaced them with the pettiest, cheapest, most thoughtless gifts I could find. For his father, I got a single pair of novelty business socks. For his mother, I picked up a generic supermarket brand bottle of shampoo. For his sister, I found the nastiest perfume I could find at the dollar store. And for his brother and his wife, who owned a tiny chihuahua, I got the biggest rawhide bone I could find, one that was far too large for their dog to ever use. That saved me about $600, which I immediately put toward a deposit on a new apartment. My husband came home from Christmas lunch absolutely furious. He said I had humiliated him, that I had embarrassed him in front of his family. He asked me what I had been thinking, why I would do something so petty. I just looked at him and asked him why on earth he would expect me to buy expensive, thoughtful gifts for people who had made it clear they hated me. The divorce papers were served last week. And remember that prenup his family was so insistent on? The one that was supposed to protect his millionaire status? Well, turns out it also protected my savings from him. He isn't eligible for a cent. No alimony, no access to my accounts, nothing. He has no money for rent. He has no money for car insurance. Not my problem anymore. Some of my friends and family are on my side, saying they're proud of me for finally standing up for myself. Others think I was too petty, that it wasn't like me. Maybe it wasn't. But after years of trying to be the bigger person, I finally realized that some people don't deserve kindness. Update 1. Many thanks to everyone for their support on my last post. I didn't expect such an overwhelming response, but I truly appreciate all the kind words and encouragement. I thought I'd send a small update because, as expected, the divorce process is already turning into an absolute circus. First, for those who asked how the deposit on my new apartment was only the $600 I saved on the gifts, it certainly wasn't. That money helped, but I had to dip into savings to make it happen. Thankfully, because of the prenup his family was so desperate to have, I still had my savings to dip into. The irony is not lost on me. My soon-to-be ex-husband didn't bother reaching out to me after I left. Not a single text, not a single call, nothing. I had to assume he was too busy either sulking or convincing himself I'd eventually come crawling back. That changed the moment he was served the divorce papers and my lawyer made it clear we were enforcing the prenup. Then, suddenly, it was as if a switch had been flipped. The texts and voicemails started pouring in, all filled with carefully worded affection. He missed me. He loved me. This was all just a misunderstanding. We could fix it if I just came home. His family, who had spent years treating me like a stain on their designer couch, also suddenly found it in their hearts to reach out. His mother left long-winded voicemails about how divorce was such a tragic thing, how I should consider working through this, how real love was about forgiveness. His sister, who had barely acknowledged my existence for most of my marriage, texted me as if we had been lifelong best friends. His father, who had spent years sneering at me from across the dinner table, sent a single, cold message about how marriage vows were sacred, and abandoning a husband in his time of need was a shameful thing to do. None of it worked. I didn't respond. It didn't take long for their supposed concern to curdle into something much uglier. When I continued to ignore them, the tone of their messages changed overnight. The next round of texts were laced with anger, blame, and condescension. My husband accused me of being heartless, selfish, and a liar who had apparently never loved him to begin with. His mother switched tactics, claiming I had manipulated her son and was stealing from him by taking my own money with me. His sister sent a single, snide message saying it was no wonder nobody in the family ever liked me. His father, ever the charmer, made a vague comment about how people who play dirty games get what's coming to them. My lawyer advised me not to block them. Keeping a record of their harassment could come in handy later. So I muted them and went on with my life, assuming their tantrum would eventually die out. Then last night, the calls started. One after another. My phone lit up with my husband's name, buzzing non-stop like some kind of deranged alarm. At first, I ignored them. He had already made it clear I was the villain in his narrative, and I had no interest in entertaining whatever meltdown he was currently having. But then I started wondering if something had actually happened. Maybe it was an emergency. Maybe something had happened to one of my former in-laws. Maybe this was something serious, and I would regret not answering. So I picked up. The second I said hello, I knew I had made a mistake. There was no panic in his voice. No urgency. Just the same infuriating entitlement I had spent years trying to ignore. He sighed dramatically, as if this was all such an inconvenience for him, and told me the rent was a week late. There was a pause, as if he was waiting for me to gasp in horror and apologize profusely. Instead, I calmly informed him that was strange, because I had paid my landlord 6 days ago. Another dramatic sigh. No, not the rent for my new apartment. The rent for here. I stared at the screen, dumbfounded. Then it clicked. He actually thought I was going to keep paying for the apartment I no longer lived in. I reminded him I had moved out, that it was no longer my problem, and that he should not, under any circumstances, expect me to cover his living expenses. He didn't take that well. Within minutes, his parents jumped in with their own barrage of messages. His mother, of course, took the lead, sending me an essay about how I had made a legal and moral commitment to that home and how I was still responsible for fulfilling my obligations. His father, ever the blunt instrument, simply informed me that they were going to sue me for the remainder of the lease. I didn't even bother responding. They could try. They could flail and threaten all they wanted. But there was one tiny problem with their grand plan: they didn't own me, and they certainly didn't own my finances. When we had first decided to move to his hometown, his parents had immediately taken control of the situation, renting an apartment for us before we even had a chance to look ourselves. At the time, I had told myself they were just being helpful. That they were trying to make things easier for us. In reality, it had been about control. They wanted to ensure they had the final say in where we lived, how we lived, and how much influence they could exert over us. Every year, they had quietly renewed the lease in their own names, never once bothering to put either me or my husband on the paperwork. Now, their own power play had backfired spectacularly. The lease wasn't in my name. My name wasn't anywhere on the documents. The landlord had no idea who I was, and as far as they were concerned, I had never lived there to begin with. If my ex and his parents wanted to throw a fit over unpaid rent, that was their problem, not mine. I was just grateful I had been able to prepare for my exit in advance. If I had left impulsively, they would have used their ownership of the apartment as leverage, locking me out, throwing my things away, and making sure I had nowhere to go. But I had played the long game, and now they had no control left. I have no doubt the divorce is going to be a bumpy ride. My soon-to-be ex-husband has made it clear he plans to make things as difficult as possible, and his family has never been one to let go of a grudge. They're going to throw every accusation, every manipulative tactic, every dramatic plea at the wall to see what sticks. But for the first time in years, I don't have to care. Because I am free. Update 2. Just when I thought my soon-to-be ex and his family had reached peak entitlement, they somehow managed to outdo themselves. After their rent scam failed spectacularly, they decided it was time for a new approach. This time, they weren't just trying to get money out of me for a specific expense, they wanted me to continue supporting the family indefinitely. According to his mother, who apparently thinks she's the supreme authority on marriage, a wife's duty does not simply end because she walks away. That little gem was nestled in the middle of an overly dramatic, typewritten email that she sent me at 2 in the morning. According to her, marriage is a lifelong commitment, and even if I was no longer living in their home, I was still his wife, which meant I had an obligation to make sure he was taken care of financially, emotionally, and practically. I didn't respond because, frankly, engaging with these people is like throwing a lit match into a gas leak. Ignoring them was the best course of action, or so I thought. I assumed the email was just another manipulative guilt trip, one last desperate attempt to see if I could be bullied into submission. What I did not expect, however, was for the bills to start rolling in at my new apartment. At first, I was confused. A gas bill showed up, followed by a water bill, then a cable bill. All in my ex-husband's name, yet neatly addressed to me. My first thought was that it had to be some kind of clerical mistake. Maybe an autopay issue, maybe a mix-up at the post office. Then the credit card statements arrived. That was when it hit me, this wasn't a mistake. This was deliberate. My ex had taken it upon himself to update all of his billing addresses to mine. He wasn't just hoping I'd pay them out of obligation, he was outright expecting me to. He wasn't even being subtle about it. He had made sure that every single one of his financial responsibilities now had my address attached, as if I would just see the envelopes, sigh, and go back to bankrolling his life like a dutiful little ex-wife. When the payments didn't magically make themselves, his text started. At first, they were polite, reminders, really. Hey, just a heads up, the utilities are due. Then they became more insistent. Not sure if you forgot, but the water bill was due yesterday. Then came the not-so-subtle accusations. I don't understand why you're dragging this out. Just handle your responsibilities. And finally, the full-blown tantrum. Are you seriously this petty? You know I need the internet for work, right? That last one was accompanied by a particularly furious voicemail, in which he ranted about how he had been in the middle of something important when the Wi-Fi cut out. Apparently, it was my fault, because in his mind, I was still responsible for keeping the lights on in a home I no longer lived in. At that point, I had had enough. I forwarded every single bill and statement to my lawyer, who sent his family a beautifully worded cease and desist letter. I also called every company involved and had my address removed from their accounts. That should have been the end of it. But of course, these people don't know how to quit while they're ahead. 2 days later, I got a call from a debt collector. My ex had apparently stopped making payments on his car months ago, and now they were looking to repossess it. The kicker. He had told them that I would be the one handling the payments going forward. The woman on the phone, clearly used to dealing with nonsense like this, sounded almost bored when she asked if I was absolutely sure that I wasn't going to cover the cost. He had assured them that his wife was taking care of it. I laughed, probably louder than I should have, and informed her that my ex was many things, but financially literate was not one of them. That was when the panic truly set in for him. He realized that not only was I not going to pay his bills, but he was rapidly running out of options. His business was dead in the water, he hadn't found a new job, and now he had collectors breathing down his neck. So he did what all man-children do when they hit rock bottom, he went on a pity tour. He started reaching out to mutual friends, painting himself as the abandoned, struggling victim of a cruel and heartless wife who had thrown him to the wolves. He sobbed to anyone who would listen about how he was on the verge of homelessness, how he had given me everything, how he had loved me unconditionally and now had nothing to show for it. Most of our mutual friends, already well aware of what a leech he was, weren't buying it. A few reached out to me, mostly to share his latest round of dramatics and assure me that no one was taking him seriously. One friend summed it up perfectly in a single text: if he's so worried about being homeless, he can go live with the family that spent years treating you like garbage. I could not have said it better myself. Update 3. Just when I thought my ex and his family had exhausted every possible method of manipulation, they managed to surprise me one last time. After the financial guilt trips failed, after the bills stopped rolling in and the debt collectors realized I had nothing to do with his mess, they went full nuclear. If they couldn't drain me financially, they would find another way to make my life miserable. And this time, they aimed for the one thing I was so close to finally reclaiming, my freedom. It started with an official-looking letter in the mail, something crisp and businesslike, the kind of envelope that instantly makes your stomach drop before you even open it. The return address was from a so-called family mediator, a name that meant nothing to me. I assumed it was just another desperate attempt at an intervention, one last dramatic plea for reconciliation that I had absolutely no intention of acknowledging. But when I opened it, my breath caught. The letter stated that my ex was officially contesting the divorce. According to him, I had abandoned the marriage without proper cause, failed to attempt reconciliation, and was therefore in violation of the supposed obligations of a spouse. Because of this, he was formally requesting a mandatory mediation period before the divorce could proceed. In short, he was trying to legally trap me into staying married to him, at least long enough for him to get his financial disaster under control. I wasn't naive. This had nothing to do with love, or closure, or even pride. This was about control. He knew the prenup had protected my savings. He knew he had no claim to my money, my apartment, or anything else in my name. This was a last-ditch effort to force me into staying connected to him for as long as possible, to delay the inevitable, to drag this out in the hopes that I would eventually give up and give in. I called my lawyer immediately. She barely sounded surprised. This was, apparently, a classic move from bitter, entitled men who couldn't accept the consequences of their own failures. It was a scare tactic, a desperate attempt to make my life so exhausting that I would just cave and agree to his terms. But that was never going to happen. I let my lawyer handle it, but my ex and his family weren't done. They had tried financial sabotage, and now that they were attempting legal roadblocks, they figured they might as well go for a full character assassination too. Rumors started spreading, first subtly, then with full force. According to them, I hadn't simply walked away from the marriage, I had cheated, abandoned my poor husband for another man, humiliated him and left him heartbroken. The fact that I was very much single did not seem to matter. They told mutual friends, hoping to turn people against me. They reached out to extended family, painting themselves as victims of my cold betrayal. They even had the audacity to spread whispers at my workplace, hoping to tarnish my professional reputation. When that didn't work, they escalated again. His mother, the same woman who once threw my homemade cake in the trash, showed up at my job. She arrived in full dramatic mourning mode, tears streaking her face, voice trembling with perfectly performed heartbreak. She begged for 5 minutes, just 5 minutes to talk, to plead her case, to tell her side of the story. Security had to escort her out while she sobbed about how I was destroying her family. I found out later that she had spent the next hour sitting in the parking lot, dramatically dabbing at her eyes in full view of the office windows, hoping someone, anyone, would feel sorry for her. Then came the real kicker. My ex's father, the man who had never spoken to me without a condescending edge in his voice, decided it was time to step in. He sent an email with the subject line, "A final offer." Inside, he laid out what he called reasonable conditions for a peaceful divorce, as if this entire disaster was my fault and I needed to appease them in order to be granted my freedom. He claimed that, in order to maintain the family's reputation, I needed to agree to 4 specific terms. First, I was to cover 6 months of rent for my ex so he could transition into single life, as if he hadn't already been freeloading off his parents. Second, I was to sign a non-disclosure agreement stating that I would never speak negatively about their family, because, of course, their image mattered more than the truth. Third, I was to return every single gift they had ever given me over the years, including my own engagement ring, as if my presence in their lives had been nothing more than a failed investment. And finally, in what was truly the most laughable demand, I was to write a formal letter of apology for failing to meet expectations as a wife. I nearly choked on my coffee. I forwarded the email to my lawyer, who responded with something so perfectly dismissive that I wanted to frame it, tell them to go to hell. But in legal terms, of course. And so she did. She shut them down once and for all, filing a motion to expedite the divorce on the grounds of ongoing harassment. We didn't just ask the court to finalize things quickly, we provided evidence of the manipulative emails, the bills sent to my address, the security incident at my job. My ex and his family had spent months trying to wear me down, and in the end, all they did was hand me proof that I needed this marriage to end immediately. The judge agreed. Yesterday, I received the official confirmation. The divorce is finalized. It's done. No more paperwork, no more court dates, no more connections to a man who had spent years dragging me through his family's dysfunction. As for my ex, from what I've heard, he's still unemployed, still living off his parents, still convinced that he's the tragic victim in all of this. His mother, no doubt, is thrilled to have him back under her control, where she can continue to coddle and enable him while blaming me for everything wrong in his life. His father will keep pretending that their family's reputation hasn't been shredded. His sister will keep acting like none of this is their fault. And me? I have never felt lighter. My apartment is my own. My money is my own. My time, my energy, my peace, they are finally mine again. I owe no one anything. For the first time in years, I am free.